Michel Houellebecq. I hadn't seen any novel make the statement that entering the workforce was like entering the grave. That from then on, nothing happens and you have to pretend to be interested in your work. And, furthermore, that some people have a sex life and others don't, just because some are more attractive than others. I wanted to acknowledge that if people don't have a sex life, it's not for some moral reason, it's just because they're ugly. Once you've said it, it sounds obvious, but I wanted to say it. Like literature, music can overwhelm you with sudden emotion, can move you to absolute sorrow or ecstasy. Like literature, painting has the power to astonish, and to make you see the world through fresh eyes. But only literature can put you in touch with another human spirit, as a whole, with all its weaknesses and grandeurs, its limitations, its pettinesses, its obsessions, its beliefs, with whatever it finds moving, interesting, exciting, or repugnant. The story of a life can be as long or as short as the teller wishes. Whether the life is tragic or enlightened, the classic gravestone inscription marking simply the dates of birth and death has, in its brevity, much to recommend it. I maintained a tactical silence. When you maintain a tactical silence, and look people right in the eye, as if drinking in their words, they talk. People like to be listened to, as every researcher knows, every writer, every spy. Contemporary consciousness is no longer equipped to deal with our mortality. Never in any other time, or any other civilization, have people thought so much or so constantly about aging. Each individual has a simple view of the future. A time will come when the sum of pleasures that life has left to offer is outweighed by the sum of pain. One can actually feel the meter ticking, and it ticks always in the same direction. This weighing up of pleasure and pain, which everyone is forced to make sooner or later, leads logically, at a certain age, to suicide. The metaphysical mutation that gave rise to materialism and modern science in turn spawned two great trends, rationalism and individualism. Huxley's mistake was in having poorly evaluated the balance of power between these two. Specifically, he underestimated the growth of individualism brought about by an increased consciousness of death. Individualism gives rise to freedom, the sense of self, the need to distinguish oneself and to be superior to others. A rational society, like the one he describes in Brave New World, can diffuse the struggle. Economic rivalry, a metaphor for mastery over space, has no more reason to exist in a society of plenty, where the economy is strictly regulated. Sexual rivalry, a metaphor for mastery over time through reproduction, has no more reason to exist in a society, where the connection between sex and procreation has been broken. But Huxley forgets about individualism. He doesn't understand that sex, even stripped of its link with reproduction, still exists, not as a pleasure principle, but as a form of narcissistic differentiation. The same is true of the desire for wealth. Why has the Swedish model of social democracy never triumphed over liberalism? Why has it never been applied to sexual satisfaction? Because the metaphysical mutation brought about by modern science leads to individuation, vanity, malice and desire. Any philosopher, not just Buddhist or Christian, but any philosopher worthy of the name, knows that, in itself, desire, unlike pleasure, is a source of suffering, pain and hatred. Youth, beauty, strength, the criteria for physical love, are exactly the same as those of Nazism. It's perfectly possible to live without expecting anything of life. In fact, it's the most common way. As I got older, I also found myself agreeing more with Nietzsche, as is no doubt inevitable, once your plumbing starts to fail. According to Hutchinson and Rawlins, the development of systems of hierarchical dominance within animal societies does not correspond to any practical necessity, nor to any selective advantage. It simply constitutes a means of combating the crushing boredom of life, in the heart of nature. Adulthood is hell. In the face of such a trenchant position, moralists today will utter vague, opprobrious grumblings while waiting for a chance to strike with their obscene intimations. Perhaps Lovecraft actually could not become an adult. What is certain is that he did not want to. And given the values that govern the adult world, how can you argue with him? The reality principle, the pleasure principle, competitiveness, permanent challenges, sex and status, hardly reasons to rejoice. Men live alongside one another like cattle. It is a miracle if once in a while, they manage to share a bottle of booze. Young girls today were more sensible, more sophisticated. Nowadays, they worried more about their exam results and did their best to ensure they would have a decent career. For them, going out with boys was simply a game, a distraction motivated as much by narcissism, as by sexual pleasure. They later would try to make a good marriage, basing their decision on a range of social and professional criteria, as well as on shared interests and tastes. Of course, in doing this, they cut themselves off from any possibility of happiness, a condition indissociable from the outdated, intensely close bonds, so incompatible with the exercise of reason, but this was their attempt to escape the moral and emotional suffering, which had so tortured their forebears. This hope was, unfortunately, rapidly disappointed. The passing of love's torments simply left the field clear for boredom, emptiness and an anguished wait for old age and death. When you got right down to it, my dick was the one organ that hadn't presented itself to my consciousness through pain, only pleasure. Modest but robust, it had always served me faithfully. Or, you could argue, I had served it. If so, its yoke had been easy. It never gave me orders. It sometimes encouraged me to get out more, but it encouraged me humbly, without bitterness or anger.